What's worse than a rampaging black bear? A rampaging black bear high on cocaine. That was the inspiration for a comedy horror film released in 2023, and it was based on a true story. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. In September 1985, a ravenous black bear went on a drug-fueled, murderous rampage. With cocaine coursing through its veins, it charged through the woodland, launching itself at anyone and anything in its path. Sound like something from a horror movie? Well, it partly is and partly isn't. A comedy horror has been made about a very unusual incident that happened that September. Although true accounts vary slightly depending on who you ask, it all started with Andrew Thornton, a former paratrooper and U.S. narcotics officer turned drug smuggler. It's quite ironic how someone of that caliber and with those careers under his belt turned to a life of crime. But his ex-wife said that he was an adrenaline junkie. He was always looking for the next adventure to fuel his appetite, and when working in the narcotics police unit, he grew bored of his somewhat mundane work and turned to drug smuggling instead. He had all the skills for it. He could pilot a small aircraft, he could leap out of one if need be, and he knew how to avoid detection from the very narcotics officers he used to call his colleagues. But he wasn't always successful at his newfound role. He had been caught smuggling marijuana before and spent 6 months in prison as a result. But that didn't stop him. On September 11, 1985, he loaded up his Cessna 404 with cocaine, departed Colombia with his flying partner, and headed for the States. The journey was going as planned, or so Andrew's partner thought. But when they were flying over Tennessee, Andrew flicked the Cessna onto autopilot, unclipped his harness, and squeezed into the back of the plane. His flying partner looked back nervously. Some say the engine was beginning to fail. Others say this was all part of Andrew's plan. Either way, he opened the cabin door and began shoving the heavy equipment out. The duffel bags plummeted toward the ground, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cocaine flying through the air. Then, when all the drugs were out, Andrew signaled to his partner to make the jump. It was a terrifying moment, but there was no time for hesitation. His partner leapt out of the plane, quickly followed by Andrew. But despite being an expert paratrooper, Andrew had failed to check his parachute on that fateful flight. When he pulled the cord, the chute failed to open properly, and Andrew spent his last adrenaline-filled moments wrestling with the pull cord, desperately trying to properly release the parachute. He became entangled in the parachute and smacked down onto somebody's driveway in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was quite a shock for the homeowner. He was 85-year-old Fred Myers, and he rushed outside to see Andrew's lifeless body lying in tatters on the driveway. He was quite a sight. He had $15 million worth of cocaine stuffed into a green Army duffel bag that was strapped to his body, $4,500 cash, gold coins in his pockets, a selection of knives, and 2 pistols. The police arrived on scene. It was a very unusual call-out, but they gradually pieced together what had happened. And when a small plane reportedly crashed into a mountain 60 miles away in Hayesville, western North Carolina, they discovered that it had belonged to Andrew. Andrew's flying partner landed safely and was immediately arrested, but he was found not guilty of any crimes and was later released. He had merely been a co-pilot for the journey and claimed innocence right up until the moment Andrew began throwing the shipment out of the plane, and he himself had to jump. The packages of cocaine were discovered one by one, following the flight path and the trajectory from which they were flung from the plane door. All except one were found. Meanwhile, a black bear was scouring the woodland of Chattahoochee National Forest. Always on the lookout for food and an easy meal, the bear lifted its head skyward. It had smelt something, an unusual scent that wafted on the gentle breeze. It lumbered through the trees, its body rippling with muscle. The bear emerged into a clearing and walked over to something. It was one of the duffel bags. The bear hesitated slightly and then sniffed it cautiously. this wasn't like anything it had ever smelt before. It pawed at the bag, turning it over. Then it ripped it open like a garbage bag, slicing it with its long, sharp claws. It began sniffing the contents within. Its black nose turned white as it inhaled the powder. It licked its lips. The cocaine began to surge through its body. Its heart began racing inside its ribcage. The adrenaline was pumping, and the bear's eyes were wide. It devoured the entire contents, but it didn't take long before things turned bad. Feeling the rush, the bear began to reel around in anxiety. Not sure which way to turn or what was happening to it, the bear made a run for the trees. It was terrified. The unfamiliar feeling was overwhelming. The bear galloped across the open space, running for cover, but after just a few hundred yards, it collapsed to the ground. 3 months later, a hunter was searching for deer in the same area of the Chattahoochee National Forest. Quietly, he stepped through the undergrowth, ducking under low-lying branches and stepping over fallen trunks. He held his rifle by his side. Then he came to a clearing. It was the same clearing the bear had been in all those months ago. The hunter stood stock still. He scanned the open grassland, staring through his binoculars. It was the perfect place for deer to come and graze in. He watched and he waited. Then something caught his eye. It was something black. He froze. It was a black bear just yards from where he was standing. How could he have been so stupid? He was now in imminent danger. If the bear saw him, then it might feel threatened. It might be caught by surprise and turn and attack. The hunter held his breath. The bear clearly hadn't seen him yet. It was lying on the ground. The hunter hesitated. He didn't know whether to sit and wait it out, hoping that he wouldn't be detected by the bear, or to retreat and hope that bear didn't pick up his scent or hear his footsteps. While deciding, he raised his rifle and stared down the scope for a closer look at the bear. It wasn't moving. He couldn't even see it breathing. Cautiously, he stepped forward, the rifle trained on the bear. Then he realized that it was dead, and it had been dead for some time. It was a 79-kilogram, 174-pound black bear. Just looking at it from a safe distance, it looked as though it had been healthy. Although it was mostly just bones by now, its coat was gleaming, and it didn't appear to be that old. The hunter called in the rangers of the park and told them what he had found. Shortly afterwards, an investigation ensued. It wasn't long before they found the duffel bag of cocaine a few hundred yards away. Inside the bag, there had been 40 bundles of cocaine, 40 kilograms in total, which was valued at $20 million. Every single one of the bundles had been ripped open and were now empty. They suspected the bear was the culprit. When they performed a necropsy on the bear, they were shocked by what they found. Its stomach was packed to the brim with the drugs. The medical examiner couldn't believe how much the bear had ingested and said that no animal on the planet could survive that quantity of cocaine. But it was clear that only a few grams had actually made it to the bear's bloodstream before it died. The high it may have experienced only lasted seconds before the bear collapsed from a huge range of fatal conditions caused by massive overdose: cerebral hemorrhaging, respiratory failure, hyperthermia, renal failure, heart failure, and stroke. So although the bear didn't go on a murderous rampage whilst high on an extraordinary amount of drugs, like in the movie, it did fall victim to the drug smuggling trade and was one of the more unusual callouts the Rangers received that year.